Could you ask Mr. Brown to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear, when you're ready.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown, can we now turn on to pre-inquest action 16, excuse me, which was a general review of training delivered to control officers to confirm that the FSG training was suitable and sufficient. Now, the first starting point really for this is your second statement. And could we go to LFB 000 84020/14? And if we go to paragraph 35, where you say this: I did not have any direct involvement in the review of control officer training. I note the review report states this report contains observations and recommendations of SM Steve Kelly, Station Training Support and Performance Team. Is it right that this pre-inquest action was met, in the first instance at least, by Mr. Kelly's report of August 2010?
That's correct, yes.
Could we now turn to the LACNAL control report, which we can find at HOM *0 1124/52. Excuse me. And if we could look at paragraph 309. And there we see recommendation 3 in the box below the substantive text. And that recommendation said this: control officer training should be kept under review with formal periodic reviews. Such reviews should include officer from outside control who can advise on the specialist content of training, e.g. fire safety. And then we see action 3 below that, which says initial audit completed. This is to be an ongoing process. What steps did you take to implement an ongoing audit process for control training? Or was there simply a system of formal periodic reviews?
I think it was a system of formal periodic reviews. It certainly was our intention that the team with which Stephen Kelly worked for would revisit, albeit that they wasn't strictly speaking a responsibility because it's not been outsourced to Babcock, but nevertheless that was our plan, but I don't think that ever came to fruition.
I think it's one point on which you and Mr. Hayward agreed. He could not identify that there was an ongoing audit process. Can you help us as to why there wasn't an ongoing audit process?
I think what we did was we took the opportunity as and when it arose. So, for example, the MOPAC opportunity and then the opportunity when the stress survey suggested a review was appropriate. And then, of course, and I'm apologies for referring constantly, but the vision issue just completely swamped us in terms of other things. So I think probably that was our attempt to deal with it, but vision clearly got in the way.
Can you explain why the coroner was told that there would be an ongoing audit process?
I think because that was genuinely our intention, that there would be more of a scheduled audit process along the lines of what Steve Kelly had done. But for the reasons I've just laid out, it never quite happened that way.
Could we turn to LFB 000 60701/1? We've looked at this email correspondence earlier today, and if we could look at Assistant Commissioner Chandra's email to you on the 28th of June 2013, if we can turn over to page 2, and it's roughly halfway down that page, he deals with item 16, which is action 16, which we're discussing now. Excuse me. He said this: completed 22nd of June 2010. Yes, in part. The planning and recording of general control training has improved. However, the training syllabus for control needs a fundamental refresh and needs to be brought into the mainstream training provision applicable to the rest of the brigade. We should give consideration to control training being subject to independent scrutiny and assessment. Recommended action. a fundamental review of control training should be undertaken in 2015-16. Training for control should be brought under the training contract currently in place with Babcock. Explore the options for independent external peer review or audit of control training. What did you make of the finding that control training needed a fundamental refresh?
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that. And his first point, a fundamental review of training should be undertaken in 15-16. So an element of that was included in Tom George's report, although Richard's recommendation wasn't the catalyst for Tom George's report.
Did you discuss these findings and his recommendations with Mr. Chandler?
Yes, I did.
And what was his rationale for placing control training in the responsibility of Babcock?
Because Babcock had responsibility for the rest of the brigade by now, and we were seeing some real benefits of that in terms of the quality of the training being delivered to station-based staff. So Richard, not unreasonably, took the view that we should outsource it to Babcock. And I think there was a few others in brigade control that probably felt the same.
Did you agree with that recommendation?
I agreed with it in terms of a long-term goal, but not at that moment in time, I didn't.
And what were the obstacles to short or medium-term implementation of that goal?
Because, in my view, what would have happened is Babcock would have, understandably, taken our training staff and subsumed them into the Babcock as Babcock employees, and then we as an organisation would have lost any control over immediate training. And we was at a time now where we really needed that immediate training, and we wouldn't be able to respond immediately in a way we currently could. And also, if they became Babcock trainers, then Babcock again would understandably utilise them maybe to train other brigades.
Sorry to interrupt there, but what consideration was there, though, of phased implementation of Babcock being responsible for training? So you avoided the problem of your staff being immediately subsumed into the Babcock network and set up alternative arrangements so that it was phased over a fixed period of time.
We didn't set up phased arrangements that structurally, but what we did do was agree that the big learning and the CBTs would be delivered by Babcock, but the actual employment of our staff into the Babcock structure would be revisited in time. And I had some discussions with Peter Groves around this. So whilst we didn't set a date in time when that would happen, we certainly parked it for the future that this would be an aspiration.
It doesn't appear to have cropped up in the documents as a topic to which you routinely returned. Is that a fair observation?
That's correct, yes.
So nothing ever happened further in terms of substantive consideration?
Not whilst I was there, no.
What was Mr. Chandler's rationale for subjecting control training to independent assessment and review?
I think that was purely on the basis that Steve Kelly had come in and given a good and sound review of control, and it seemed a good idea to repeat that process.
Mr. Kelly had not given control and training in particular a good bill of health. There's much to be said for having the operations and control in particular training subject to third-party scrutiny, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. What happened to that recommendation?
I think that when you say third-party scrutiny...
independent
from
scrutiny from someone outside the LFB.
Okay, outside the LFB. So there were peer reviews going on with other fire services, and I think it's come before the inquiry. We had a peer review. Control training wasn't part of that peer review, wasn't subjected to that particular audit. So I think in our mind it was the case that at some point we would introduce that. But in the interim, it was the likes of MOPAC and people like Tom George who were independent because they weren't part of control that were carrying out various different reviews. But we didn't get to the point that the spirit of what Richard was recommending here.
And nothing happened, in short.
Not outside of what I've said, no.
I think we touched upon the peer review in Module 5 evidence, and I can't remember whether we discussed that with you. But can you help us as to why control training did not form part of that particular peer review process?
I think the peer review, I think there were 4 issues, and I believe we did discuss it. But there were, I guess, more pressing organisational issues. So, for example, industrial relations was one of those, which was a real obstacle for us at the time organisationally. And I guess brigade control training just didn't make it onto that list at that time, is the short answer.
Mr. Chandler also recommended that a fundamental review of control training should take place in 2015-2016. That review didn't take place, did it?
Not in the way Richard Chandler meant, no. But as I say, Tom George's review, there was an aspect of it that I think we've looked at this morning that did cover familiarisation and training. So it was it acknowledged this, although I won't pretend to say that Richard's action was the issue that promoted Tom George's report.
Mr. George accepted that his review wasn't the fundamental review anticipated by Mr. Chandler. Can you help us as to why the root and branch scrutiny that Mr. Chandler envisaged and recommended didn't take place?
I would suggest it was because Vision was introduced in 2015 in November, and there was a lot of upset, I guess, in control in terms of coming to terms with the new system, which is why I didn't want it a part of Tom George's review, and I dealt with that personally with staff side. And I felt that to do a root and branch review of training at that point in time would be unnecessarily coloured by the review of Vision. Some people even thought that Tom George's review shouldn't go ahead at that time because of Vision. But nevertheless, I thought the issues that had come out of the stress survey were so powerful that we couldn't not do a review.
Mr. Brown, I've come to the end of my prepared questions. Sir, might I ask for a quarter of an hour to see if there's anything I've missed out, and
Yes.
see if there are any other suggestions from those who have been watching proceedings?
Right, thank you. Well, as you know, Mr. Brown, we have a break at this point to enable council to check that nothing's been overlooked and to allow other people to suggest questions that perhaps we ought to ask you. So we'll break now. We'll come back at 2:30, please. And as before, please don't discuss your evidence with anyone in the interim.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And then we'll see if there are any more questions for you at that stage.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Right, we can say 2:30, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Brown to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Brown, we'll see if there are any more questions.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Just briefly, please, sir. In your evidence, I think it was on Thursday, I asked you about what action you took to ensure that the level of resources and control could meet circumstances in which there were multiple FSG calls. And in your answer, you state that you didn't take action, in broad terms, for a number of reasons, one of which was that you were comfortable with the buddy system or fallback arrangements, which gave, quotes, unlimited support, close quotes. Would you accept, though, notwithstanding that answer, that the LFB's FSG systems and arrangements must be sufficiently resilient in themselves, not least because the buddy system itself had its own limitations?
Yeah, I would accept that we would not fall back to the buddy system routinely, and we should be sustainable. Absolutely. Equally, though, obviously, we cannot resource ourselves for every possible incident, and it's safe in the knowledge that all control rooms across England and Wales can assist each other if absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. The reason I'm hesitating...
Yeah, you're hesitating for the same reason that I'm about to interrupt you, which is the transcript's not running. I'm just going to see whether I can... have you tried refreshing it?
Not personally.
Well, that's what I've just tried, and now I've got nothing. I think it's not. It hasn't solved it. Do you have a large number of questions?
That's it.
That was it?
Yes.
Well, then in that case, I think we can finish, and the remaining exchanges will obviously be taken down and will appear in the transcript in due course.
I think so. The only final thing for me to say is to say thank you to Mr. Brown, not least because this is the second time upon which you've attended to give evidence over the past few weeks. So we're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Brown. Well, you are one of the few people who's made 2 appearances before the inquiry, and we are very grateful to you for coming along the second time. As I think I said to you last time, it's always very helpful to us to hear what people have to tell us, particularly from senior people in the London Fire Brigade. So we are very welcome, and I think I can say that safely on behalf of all 3 members of the panel. So
thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. And that's it then, and you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear. Now, we have other witnesses to hear in due course, but not, I think, today. Is that right?
That's right. That is the end of the evidence for today. Mr. Millett will be taking former Commissioner Danny Cotton tomorrow.
All right. Good. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll break at that point, and we'll resume here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, please.
Thanks, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much.